It's very important that your sketch design is drawn to as detailed level as possible. That's why we follow the grid. That's why we try to stay within the lines and the measurements of that grid, because then we transfer all that information to AutoCAD. So I want to go through the process of being able to do that. And hopefully when you're working on a landscape design, you have some architectural drawings you can begin with. So I'm going to open up the set here. This particular drawing that I have here is a house that I designed, so I'll be using that as our example. This is the clay residence, and we're going to be working with this throughout the project. And this is typically the way it's shown if it's drawn in a specific manner. So the way this drawing is presented is you have the plan view or the top view, and then on each side you have an elevation, what it looks like from that side. And this is important to know because this is how an architectural set of drawings are done so that you get the reflective surfaces on each side. What we're doing is we're inserting our sketch design into this so that we can then draw over top of it. And we're using the CAD drawing as our basis for that. Okay, so this is a grid that I developed, a 2 foot by 2 foot grid that we then printed and we created our sketch design. So that is to absolute scale. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this grid layer so it's no longer visible. And we're going to create a layer that's designed specifically to insert the graphic. So we'll create a new layer. And I'm just going to move over that layer because it's on a different screen. And I'll click on the create, and this will be insert or insert graphic layer. Doesn't matter which one you call it. I'll leave it as white. That's fine. And close it. So at this point, I want to insert my graphic. Now I have my secondary menu open. If you don't, you have to go beside drawings and annotations and click on the drop down menu and select show menu bar. This says hide because it's visible. And here I'm going to insert the PDF file. Now we have two different options here. We have a raster image file or a PDF file that we would typically insert. The raster image file is a JPEG, and a JPEG, the term raster simply means that it's pixelated, and a JPEG would follow under that category. PDF files have its own sort of unique qualities to it, so it can't follow under the same image, although it is also pixel based in this particular case. And so we're going to select PDF, and I've already gone to the directory where my images are, and I've got a bunch of images there. So when I select the examples that I have here and I open it up, it'll actually show me multiple pages if I have it here. So I have several different pages that I could insert. This is the one I want, so it's already pre-selected. Don't worry about insert specify or insertion point specify on screen or scale. Make sure these two are ticked off because we're going to manually place it and then we're going to adapt it to our actual image. We can't really do any scaling at this point. So I select OK, and it's asking me where I want to place it. So imagine, if you will, we've drawn the back here of the front yard, and it's approximately this size. So that's how big I want the piece of paper. So I'm going to click once and then click again, and that will give me the size. Now, notice it's not visible. One step was missing, which was that I had to actually switch the layer to the insert. See, this is a common error, and this is why I brought it forth. When we turn off the grid and we forget to switch layers, it didn't show up anything when I try to insert it because that layer is off. So I'm going to go into the insert layer this time and insert PDF. And I'll go back to the student examples and click on the first one. Make sure specify on screen and specify on screen for scale and insertion pointer there. And again, that image, we want to have the same size as the backyard graphic that we presented. So we click in one spot and we'll move it. See how it creates the page? So imagine, if you will, how big your background image was. Mine was slightly smaller than that, but there it is. And there's the graphic. Now you can notice several things. It's in the wrong direction. It's not the same size, and I can't read the drawing through. So what I want to do first of all is take this drawing and put it in the background. So I'll click on the edge. You'll notice that anytime you insert a graphic, you can't select the center of the graphic. There's only a selection point on the edge. And you'll notice there's only one node. That's where you actually inserted it. So at this point, I've selected the edge, and I'm going to right click on that node. And about halfway down, I have the option draw order. And I want to send this right to the back. And what that will do, and you'll see in my picture right away, that the CAD drawing will come forward. And that's what we want to do. We want this as a background image. Now, I have to rotate it in the right direction and move it, scale it, all of that. So let's go through the process. Rotate. I'm going to select the image again. There it is. I don't want to pick anything else, so I press Enter or right mouse key. So I want to click on that corner position, and I'm going to rotate it counterclockwise. So that's a positive angle, and I want to rotate it 90 degrees. So I type in 90, Enter, and there's my image. Okay, let's move this. Now, what I've got to do is line up the graphic with the CAD drawing. So I'm going to start with picking a base point that I can identify on the graphic that matches on the CAD drawing. So here I'm going to zoom right in, and I want to pick out as far a point as possible because then I can scale it up to the CAD drawing. And I'm going to pick this point right here. So I'm going to move the graphic. So I'm going to click on it, press Enter, and I'm going to zoom in on that point right there, right to the pixel level. How do we know we're at the pixel level? We'll see the squares. And that's really what's critical here, is that we start seeing the squares. And this identifies that it's a raster base or a PDF type of file. So you'll notice these squares, they're kind of all over the place. They're not one solid color. So I want to pick the thickest region of the darkest color, which is this group of 4, and I want to pick the corner. So I'm going to go right into this group of 4 and click. So from there, it's going to move, or I'm going to move that particular image right to the corner of the house, which is right here. So those 2 points are lined up, as you can see, but the scale is way off. My image in the background is far smaller than the actual graphic. So now I'm going to scale it up. And when we scale it up, we want to pick the furthest points apart to get the most accurate scaling. And this will make sense as I go through it. So I'm going to click on the scale tool, and I'll click on the image once again. We're the image, not the drawing. Press Enter. Now, I want to pick the base point. Notice it's got a selection point. That's actually picking the CAD point. But since I've lined these two up, they're exactly the same place. Perfect. So I click this as my base point. Click. Now from here, I'm going to reference the drawing to the CAD drawing so that they scale up the same way. So I'll type in R for reference, and then I click the base point again. This is the point most students make a mistake. They forget to click the base point again. So I'm going to click the base point, which I just did, and I'm going to zoom out. So I'm rolling my mouse. Now I want to pick the furthest point here and scroll it out to the furthest point on my drawing. So I want to pick a point way out here. Again, I'm zooming in on my pixels. Now I got to be careful. There's a CAD line right here, and notice how it's snapped to the top of the CAD line, that green point. So just for safety's sake, I'm going to click Shift right mouse key. There's my temporary override snap, and select None. So it doesn't pick any of the CAD lines, but it actually picks the drawing. And once again, I'm going to pick a point just to those 4 groups of squares. So there, I've got a line coming in from this side, a line from this side. They're both about 2 pixels thick, and I want to pick that corner right there. Zoom out, so I'm rolling my mouse out, and I want that point to sit on this point right here on the end of the CAD. And see how they line up? Well, almost. The rotation is off. So this point here lines up perfectly. Great. But the drawing, the actual sketch design, is slightly off in terms of rotation. And that's possible just by the scanning process, scanning that image in and bringing it into CAD, and it may not have been a perfectly squared scan. That's okay. So we're going to select Rotate. We're going to click on the image again, press Enter. I want to go back to the base point. We're always going to the same base point where we started. It's right there. Now I'm going to scroll out just a touch. And again, I want to use a reference. I'm going to reference the angle of the image to the angle of CAD. So I'll type in R and Enter. I click the base point again. Notice I'm zooming really tight because there's so many different points I could accidentally click. So I want to click that point there, and then I roll my mouse, zoom out. Now, what I'm going to say is this. I want to pick a point on the graphic and then pick a point on CAD. So what I'm basically saying is this. I want to rotate this image from this point down to this corner, and you'll see how the image snaps to that corner. So there you have it. Now your graphic, the sketch design, is laid out on top of your CAD drawing, which now allows us to trace over top of it. Perfect. You'll see that there's some areas here that are slightly still out. So this tells me that this graphic, rather than maybe using a flatbed scanner of a high quality, it could have been a photograph. Photographs tend to distort any sort of digital imaging that you use your camera with. It has a slight distortion, a rounding of the image. And that may have been the case here. That's okay. we can still work with this. Okay, that's all great. That's exactly the way we want it. Now I want to draw on top of this image, but I don't want that image to be so pronounced because I may not be able to see my line work. So one of the options that I have here is to take that background image and fade it so it's not so pronounced. So I'll click on that edge, and when I click on the edge, and you'll notice it's popped to the PDF underlay tab, I have in here a fade option. And as I scroll through this fade, see how the background fades out? And that will make my line work a bit easier to work with. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to press escape, and I can see my CAD drawing on top of this. Now the image itself, I don't want it to move, to change in any way. So I'm going to lock that layer. And now I'm ready to draw in CAD all my elements that I have in this particular graphic. And I'll make a layer for each of the different items. So I'm looking at the back deck right now, and I will create a new layer and just call it the back deck. Now the color selection is not important what you actually pick, but you want some contrasting colors just so that you can see it. Typically the back deck in this particular case is a stone material, so I'll pick gray, not for any other reason other than it kind of looks like stone. And I'm going to make sure that that is current, and then I'll zoom in on it. So here's why it's important that we draw as accurate as we can on the sketch design. I'm going to trace over the image, but I'm going to use CAD precision in order to actually measure the distances. Now I noticed up here in my layers, because I created the layer of the back deck immediately following creating the image layer, it automatically locked it. So I'm just going to unlock it so I can actually draw on top of that line. Okay, so here I'm going to click on line, and I'm going to pick the intersection of the CAD drawing, not the image I brought in. And then I'm moving my mouse upwards, and I'm getting readings of about 13 feet and change. I don't want to use fractional inches here. I want the values to be somewhere either whole values like 13 feet, 0 inches, or any multiple of 3 inch, 4 inch, or 6 inch. So 13 foot 3, 13 foot 4, or 13 foot 6. I can also use a 13 foot 9 or a 13 foot 8. Those are more common in our industry to be used as sizes. So here I'm going to go with 13 foot 6 inches. So I'll type in at 13.5 feet, less than 90. So I'm using relative coordinates. And there is my first point of the deck. Now it's hard to see that line, but it'll become more visible as I work with the project. So I want this deck to go right out to here. But once again, I don't want to use the image. I want to use the CAD properties. So I want it to extend right to the edge of this line, that line there. Okay, so from here, I'm going to select Shift, right mouse key, perpendicular, and then move over top of the black line. You see that little green right angle image? That's showing me it's perpendicular to that point. I don't know the distance, but I want it to line up that with the house. And there we have it. Now I can go straight down. And look at that nice, beautiful measurement, 18 feet, 11 and a half inches. That's an acceptable one. And then enter. So this, and this are my CAD lines that represent my graphical image. This is why it's absolutely imperative you try to be as accurate as possible when you're actually drawing your sketch design. So when you go to trace over it, you're going to see how these numbers work out, and hopefully they'll work out pretty good. Okay. So I've got that drawn. I've got another back deck here, the back patio. And once again, I'm looking at my sketch design. I'm looking at the CAD drawing. These little lines here indicate the doors. So I may want to change my deck a bit so everything lines up with the doorway. Okay, so I'll start at the corner of the doorway and move up. As I move my mouse up, I'm getting about 9 foot 11. Well, that's 10 feet. Perfect. At 10 feet, less than 90. There's the end point of that line. And I want to go across not to where the sketch is, but where the CAD corner is there. So Shift right mouse key, perpendicular. And as I get close to that line, there's my green 90-degree angle symbol. You'll see it right above here. There we go, and straight down. So it's slightly different, that's okay, but now it's in line with the CAD drawing. That's really what's important for me in this particular case. So what else do I have here? Oh, I've got a gazebo. So let's create a gazebo layer. Gazebo. And I'm going to make this brown just so that it looks like a wood product. No other reason, just for my sake. I want to have it similar to the colors I'm going to be using. I'm going to make the gazebo layer current. And it's an octagonal. I know in our project I said use rectangles or squares. This is an octagonal. So we have a command here under the rectangle command that allows us to create multi-sided polylines. So when I click on that, I have an option here of how many sides. This one has 8 sides. Okay. And then it says start point. So I want that to start at the edge, but before I pick that option, I want the option down below to make sure I'm using the edge command of the polygon, E and enter. It's asking me for the first point. So here's my first point. Again, it's proximate. We can always move it afterwards. And as I draw this across, look what's happening. I'm creating my octagonal shape, and you can see it's the sketch design is slightly off. So I've got to pick a point somewhere along here that is more or less the size of what I anticipated, but I want a nice number here. So if I go to 5'6", that octagonal is much bigger, but not that bad. It's actually pretty good. So I like that number. So I'll type in at 5'6", less than 0. And there is my octagonal gazebo in this case. So I can draw the line work for that. And there we have it. You can see it's far more accurate than my sketch design, but it's in the location that I designed it for. Beautiful. Now I've got a couple pathways. All right, let's make a layer called pathway. And the reason I'm just going to do a couple of these, and the reason I'm doing a pathway is because we're going to be working with a command we haven't used before. And this, it's like a flagstone. So I'm going to pick something that has a bit more of a salmon tone to it there. That's pretty good. Make sure that that's current. So with pathways, the best way to be able to create these natural curves is to use a command that we have in here under draw. There's splines, and there's 2 different types, and I want you to experiment with them. That's the best way to learn how to use them. I'm going to give you an example here and how this one's used. So I'll use that spline, and I want it to come off the deck. So I'll use nearest. There's my first point. And as I move my mouse, I'm actually going to generate a curve. So let me pick my first point somewhere at the midpoint of this curve. Well, actually what it does is it creates a spline through transitional zones. So notice how this curve goes along here and then it changes a bit to the other direction. Okay, so I'm going to click a point somewhere here and then I move my mouse. And as I move my mouse, see how it's stretching that curve? Now it's not exactly perfect and I can adjust that afterwards, so it's not a problem. I'll pick another point there and I'll pick one right at the edge of the gazebo here. Again, I'll use nearest here, so it picks up the edge of the gazebo, and then press enter. And then this curve I can adjust. I can pick these nodes and I can move them. Oops, this one snap to the end. You got to be careful of that. And I'm going to select the none option here, and I'm going to move that here so it better fits my sketch. That's not too bad. I can add points to it, remove points, stretch points, do whatever I want. So what does add do? Okay, I get another point. Good. Now I can put this one here and this one over here, and it better suits the line work I have. Oops. Anytime you make a mistake, just undo. So there's my curve. That's the one I'm going to live with. I'm okay with that. What about pathways that have 2 sides to them? Well, what's unique about this is that I can actually draw a spline and offset it. So let's try this. I'm going to add a couple more nodes along the way. Try to match the curvature of what I've got here. There we go. There's the front of the deck. Enter. So there's the curve I have. I don't mind that. That's not too bad. And then I've got to determine, is it a path that's going to be changing widths? Is it a path that's uniform? Let's try a couple things. So how far offset are we going to go here? Let's check to see what the drawing says. I'm going to go into Tools, Inquiry, Distance. And what I'm going to do is just check the distance from here to here. And I got a path that's about 2 feet wide. That's really narrow. Again, this is one of those paths that we may not want to have dominant. We want something that's only a single person path. Not too sure. Okay, let's see what 2 feet will look like. So I'll click on offset and put in 2 foot distance. And that's what I'm getting as an end result. It's not exact. Now, if I want something that's a bit more natural, I can recurve that. The problem with offsetting splines is you get these multiple points. So sometimes it's easier to, rather than offset, is to draw another spline against the curve, and then you work from there. So let's see what we've got so far. In the layers menu, I'm going to go to the insert layer and turn it off. And there's my CAD drawing with all the details in precise locations that are measurable, that we're using now CAD in its intended method as a precision tool. And that's what we do. We create layers for each of the graphical image. With those layers, we can then apply onto our project all the different elements, and then we can transfer our sketch design into a CAD drawing. Okay, so the whole intention of this was not only to teach you how to insert the graphic for next week, but also to show you why it's important that this graphical image be as precise as possible.